When I first submitted this idea for a fire talk, it was part of a much larger idea based on some work I've been informally doing for the past 15 or so years. And it was also on very much a Marvel Comics X-Men kick, which is why I entitled this presentation, Are We Going Back to the Days of Future Past? So, I haven't seen the movie yet, I'm looking forward to it. However, that's where the title came from, so kudos to Marvel. I own no IP on the title. A little bit about me to set up some context. I come out of the cybersecurity community. 15, 20 years in the industry, in the government, the private sector. I've seen this industry grow up. And there are three principles that guide cybersecurity traditionally: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And those are three terms that really kind of set the stage for how we go about securing systems and data. So what does this have to do with computers and freedom and privacy? And why am I here today? Well, in 2001, I was asked to do a series of guest lectures at the National Defense University in DC about what could terrorists do to the internet post 9/11. And as I put my notes together and I started talking to the class, I came up with the idea and the realization that from a technical basis, we really were returning to our roots. And let me take you on a little bit of a memory lane jog. In the old days, maybe some of you in the room remember mainframes. And this is just one example. Mainframes were huge. They filled the size of this room. And to connect to that mainframe, you had to physically be connected. You had a dumb terminal upstairs and a cord that you could follow and it plugged into that device somewhere in the building. And all your data and all your applications was stored on that machine, the mainframe, the old green screen clackety-clack VT100 terminals. As time went on, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, Moore's Law technology evolved. We started seeing desktops and laptops and servers, and you had this same capability now being decentralized. You had the client-server architecture, LANs and WANs. Network designs allowed that same capability that was all in the mainframe to be decentralized amongst smaller servers throughout an organization, or even on a laptop, where your laptop could serve data to others, and you could run server software on your laptop, and now even your smartphone. So you have this evolution of technology where the data and the applications previously lived only in one place, on the mainframe. And over time, the data and or the applications moved where? Locally, to a local network server, locally to your own machine. And you had more positive control over this information and your ability to work and function. Here we are now in 2014 with the Internet of Things, the cloud, and what's happening? We're going back to the future. As we move forward and embrace the Internet of Things and cloud computing technologies and the gee whiz factor, we're going back to the days where all of our data and all of our applications and the ability to be productive is dependent on this connection to a centralized computing mechanism, somewhere in the cloud or a data center somewhere. And our ability to function locally can be endangered. And that, to me, is a very disturbing consideration from a security perspective from the A. Remember the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Well, security folks tend to focus all the time on confidentiality and integrity, keeping our data secret and keeping our data trustworthy. But availability never really functioned as part of the security model too much. And what I've been arguing ever since those lectures in 2001, 2003, is that availability is becoming that much more of a crucial factor for us, and it directly affects our ability to function as members of an organization, as end users, as citizens, and taking a step back, as functions of society in doing social movements, protests. You look at the Arab Spring, and when a lot of these protests started, how? On Twitter. So what does a government do to quell the protest? Shuts down Twitter or blocks Twitter. Are protests suddenly unable to protest because there's no Twitter? Have we forgotten how to protest in the absence of communication technologies? Can we affect grassroots change in society the way we used to only 20 years ago? This is a rhetorical question because the more I think about it, these lessons of confidentiality and integrity and availability tie directly into the notions of freedom and privacy. Our freedom of action, i.e. autonomy on the internet and in the real world, is is becoming more and more based on ICTs, information and communication technologies. What if we don't have access to these tools? Are we still able to function? Are we still able to be effective members of society or create or run a social movement in the absence of these technologies when problems occur? If an attacker shuts down Twitter, a denial of service attack, and we can't tweet, is the movement over? Are there alternative mechanisms we can communicate? Or are we solely dependent on Facebook for communication? What out-of-band capabilities do we have to remain resilient and help ensure our autonomy and resiliency in the modern world? And that's where I really think that there's some food for thought, lessons to learn about where are we heading. In an earlier life, I also dabbled in the futures market. And there's a great trading quote from the futures pitch in Chicago. And they say, the amateurs see the fact that you can drop this much money on something and have the prospect of winning huge. The amateur is enamored with the convenience and the benefit. But the professionals and those that last in the industry are not focused on the benefits and the gain, but what's at stake, what's the risk. And for me, coming out of the cybersecurity space, I look at these technologies, these tools of communication and interaction that permeate our lives and our society and our government, and I wonder, okay, can we function effectively in the absence of these technologies in one way or other? During my lectures at NDU, I had this great slide, and it was a graphic image, an animated GIF of networks in Croatia Serbia during the NATO bombings back in the late 90s. And you saw these red squiggles going everywhere, and it was their network. It was their national networks, communication network. And you saw the bombings occur, and the network would always change, but it never disappeared. There was resilience. If they couldn't use the internet, they used SneakerNet. If they couldn't use SneakerNet, they would use something else. And the reality was the network stayed up in some way, and people were able to communicate and mount successful civil resistance. So my work over the next couple of, or since then, and what I'm getting back into nowadays is looking at the idea of resilience and autonomy in light of this sense that we're heading back to the future, to the days of future past, and asking the question, what does this mean, not just from a technical perspective, but from an anthropological and a social perspective? What does this mean for us as people? Are we forgetting to do things? One of the earlier panelists discussed how I can't read a map anymore, I can only use GPS. There was an article in the New York Times the other day saying people can't write by cursive anymore. Well, if you can't write by hand and you can only write or communicate on a computer, are we losing something as society? And what does that mean for us in terms of our autonomy and our resilience? So those are some of the arguments that I'm looking into, some of the areas I'm looking into: technical, social, and cultural. What does this mean for the future? It's an exciting time. It involves the computers directly infecting freedom, our freedom to be autonomous, our freedom to be secure, our freedom to ensure our privacy and anonymity, and our ability to work even in the face of technical or legal adversity going forward. Thank you.